Welcome to the BDS podcast. I'm your host, Rose Griffin, and I had an amazing conversation today with Dr. Stephen Eversole and Dr. Jim Hoko. We are talking all about micro-credentials. Is this the next step for behavior analysis? Our field is so broad, and we are learning so many things when we are becoming a board certified behavior analyst. But how do we get really niche down? How do we learn a lot about a specific topic? Micro-credentials. There are a lot of pros to having a micro-credential. We are going to get into this conversation today. I learned a ton, and I feel like I need a micro-credential. I need to create a micro-credential. They are amazing. So let's get into our conversation today with Dr. Stephen Eversole and Dr. Jim Hoko.
You're listening to the BDS podcast by Behavior Development Solutions, online at bds.com. Your source for evidence-based training in applied behavior analysis since 1998. From premier curriculum supplement and exam prep to RBT training and continuing education, including live webinars and more.
Welcome to the BDS podcast. We have a great episode for you today. We have with us Dr. Stephen Eversole and Dr. Jim Hoko. Thank you so much for coming back onto the show.
Thanks, Rose. Great to be here.
And today we have a really cool topic, one that I am excited to talk about because being a speech therapist in BCBA, I see this kind of taking place in both of the fields. So we're going to be talking about micro-credentials, the next step for behavior analysis. I always like to start with kind of what is the topic that we're discussing. So some people may have never even heard of a micro-credential. Some people listening may have actually have a micro-credential. So can you tell us what exactly is a micro-credential? When I say that word, what does that exactly mean?
Jim, why don't you take that one?
Sure. Well, Rose, as I'm listening to your lead-in, I'm reminded of a time years ago when I told my father I was going to be a behavior analyst, and he thought I was going to work for the FBI. Because he didn't know what that was. And it was at a time when there were no credentials for behavior analysts. There wasn't a licensure, there wasn't certification. So I really wanted that piece of paper that said, this is what I did. Mm-hmm. Even though my father probably still wouldn't have understood what I did.
It's complicated.
So as we all know, those things happen. Certification happened, licensure happened. And those are both examples of credentialing of some sort. It's a documentation of a skill set that you have. When you go to college, you can get a Bachelor of Arts, you can get other types of degrees. Steve and I are fortunate enough to have PhDs, which is a doctoral degree. So those degrees are something that can be shown and displayed, and they should indicate to other people that there's a certain level of skill or competency there. In most cases they do, in some cases they don't. So I asked the same question, what is a micro-credential, when it was first raised with me several years ago. And I've come to learn after working on micro-credentials with BDS for the past several years, is that it's many things to many people. So you'll find a variety of definitions, but probably the best definition I came across is that a micro-credential is a digital certification of assessed knowledge, skills, and competencies, which is additional, alternate, or even complementary to or a component of formal qualifications. So it's a smaller version, basically. They represent competency-based recognition of mastery in a particular area or skill set. And it's a multi-billion-dollar business worldwide. So these micro-credentials you can find in a whole lot of areas. Just to give you some examples from some other organizations. The National Education Association, NEA, offers a variety of micro-credentials. To name a few: classroom management, relationship skills, technology integration. So you can get a micro-credential in either of those things. IBM offers micro-credentials in things like data visualization and dashboards, cybersecurity processes, or cloud computing. And, one of the universities that was one of the first ones to get into micro-credentials is the State University of New York. And they offer a whole lot of micro-credentials, but a few of those are disability awareness, nonprofit grant writing, and even basic beekeeping. So micro-credentials are smaller recognitions or verifications of a skill set, of a specific skill set. And they can be individualized, they can be stacked. So they're a very innovative and useful product that is arising.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that definition. I think all of us now are thinking back to something where somebody says they're credentialed in something and you're like, oh, it does kind of make your ears kind of perk up and think, okay, they have this specific knowledge in this area. Like when you said you both have your PhDs, to me, it's like, okay, you really accomplished a great feat. Like every PhD is made different, but there are a lot of steps to take on that educational journey. So you have ideas about this person, like, oh, okay, they're a PhD. That means something. They have a very specific knowledge base in a niche area. So, and I know last time that we talked, and just in me talking with you, Steve, we've talked about how the field has changed so much. Like I remember, I think you said that you went to conferences or a conference where you saw Skinner and just, how conferences have changed. Cause I'm kind of like immersed in this idea of going to conferences and speaking and getting booths and all this stuff. So I think this has kind of arisen as the field has grown and just exponentially has grown. I think I looked on the website and I might be wrong in this number, something like 160,000 people have an RBT certification or something around there. And it's just, wow, that's right. And we were all in the field before there wasn't such a thing. So I guess my next question that leads into that is, with the field changing and growing, why is there a need for a micro-credential? Why is that something that people will value? That's something that's important to extend that knowledge base?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So, excuse me for clearing my throat here. There's, the field has grown exponentially, and all these VCSs are doing a great job, are training large numbers of BCBAs, and they're coming out of programs. They got a set of skills, but all of us, I look back at I look at the current BCBAs, and then I think back, okay, when I was coming out of my graduate program, what did I have? And it's like, oh yeah, I wasn't, I didn't even have the skills that these guys have.
Mm-hmm.
They're already way ahead of me in many ways. So that's a really good thing that we're producing all these individuals with high levels of skills. What we don't have, though, is, there are shortcomings here and there, and there are certainly specialty areas that certain, particularly employers, want their BCBAs to have that are lacking. Like what we're doing, which we might talk about later, having to do with experimental control and being able to demonstrate that in an applied context. Or let's take another example of, maybe an organization has a need for doing remote functional assessments. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you learned how to do a functional assessment in grad school, but did you learn how to do it remotely? Maybe not. So if somebody has a micro-credential on that particular skill, then, oh, well, that's great. The potential employer could look at that person and say, oh, yes, this person has a skill set that we really value and we really need in our organization. So I see the need as being able to allow employers to drill down into the individual's skill repertoire and identify the skills that they need. And the nice thing about the micro-credentials is that they're verifiable. Mm-hmm. It's based on blockchain technology. which I really don't understand, but I do know that it's secure, and so that, if you put a digital badge on your resume or in your email or whatever, you can trust that. You know that it is issued by the organization that claims it's issued by,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a description of the skills and how those skills were verified. So that's a really nice strength and benefit and purpose for micro-credentials.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just on a some type of Facebook group, I think, and somebody was going to apply for maybe a director type job, and they were asking like, what do potential employers want to see? So it's kind of that idea of employers are probably looking, if they have a certain position open, that a micro-credential might be something that says like, wow, this person really wanted to specialize in this area, and that fits perfectly for what we're doing here. Like, just like you said, when you get out of school, I think of myself being a speech therapist and BCBA. It's like, okay, the speech therapist, our scope of practice and is very large. I could treat somebody who has aphasia, who had a stroke, somebody who has autism, but on paper, it says I can do all these things. But when you get out into the real world, it's like, are you really ready? You learn so much those first, I'm still learning, but those first 5 to 10 years, you're really, really learning. So to be able to kind of amplify that learning in a specific area that makes sense for you based on your career path or where you're currently working, I think is really nice. And I think a lot of people are kind of thirsting for that knowledge. Like, I want to feel better with this. I want to understand. I was just talking to somebody from my community who's a BCBA who maybe wants to become a speech therapist. And they were like, I want to understand AAC. I want to understand all this, milestones of communication. And they just know that they're doing a job where there's an area that they want to learn more about. So it seems like a micro-credential is something that could really kind of fill that learning gap. And I think it's great because I don't think there's a lot. I think this is newer in the field. So I think that is great. And this kind of leads to my next question, which is, how do you think this idea of micro-credentials can benefit not only professionals, but kind of our field from a larger scope?
So you were starting to hit on that as I was listening to you talk. One of the reasons why I became pretty interested in this is there's really 3 main benefits to a micro-credential, and they differ by those that they serve. So, for example, you might ask, how does a micro-credential benefit the behavior analyst? Well, right now, there's not a very good way to discriminate or to highlight the individualized skills of a behavior analyst. I'm a behavior analyst, Steve's a behavior analyst, which means we both took that great test and we passed it for the BCBA certification. But that's just an entry-level test. Even the BACB says that. That's a minimal competency test. Mm-hmm. So, what are the things that differentiate, for example, Steve from myself or any BA from any other BA? So this would provide behavior analysts with a way to document the hard work that they did in particular areas. Hard work, working on things, working in schools with SLPs. There could be micro-credentials that have to do with that. There's a lot to learn whenever you step into the job market. Other BAs are working in other areas, in hospitals, at home, in home settings, and they have different experiences. So wouldn't it be fantastic to be able to show that you put all this time and effort in and you developed a very unique skill set? So the number one, benefit is I'm a behavior analyst and I can show that skill set. I'll put that digital badge up on my profile, and I'm proud of that, and everybody can see that. Second way is, and we started to talk about this, is for the employers. The real consumers of the micro-credentials are the people who employ those who earn the micro-credentials. And the best example, you might tell that I've come from providing services in school settings for a couple of decades, but I walked into the public school setting not knowing a whole lot about public education and how the IEP process or any of that goes, or how to work with a team. So if we have people who are hiring behavior analysts, and it's not just behavior analysts hiring other behavior analysts anymore. It's sometimes people that know nothing about behavior analysts who have to hire a behavior analyst.
Yeah.
So you can go with, verbal recommendations from people, or just looking at a resume, or you can look at a certified micro-credential that will virtually guarantee that a person has a particular skill set. So if I'm a principal in a school and I want someone to be able to come in to do functional assessments, I want to know that that person not only knows what they are, but can do them, and they've shown that they can do them. So a micro-credential, would do that. And that would lead to improved services, which leads me to my third recipient of the benefits of the behavior analysis, and that's the field. So we've been growing exponentially, and it's been stressing, the whole community, and we've had to develop new educational programs for behavior analysts. And there's just a lot of stress on being able to fill this need. Mm-hmm. So you always worry about whether or not we're able to meet this demand. Well, these micro-credentials provide a way of doing that. So it helps the field of behavior analysis overall, because it will help to guarantee that the service quality remains high.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because the field is really growing so much. And you bring up school-based BCBAs, and even in my hometown here, I live in a small little suburb in Ohio, outside of Cleveland, which I'm so proud. Our school district actually has a BCBA as an employee, not a contractor. And there's nothing wrong with contracting and consulting, because that's a big part of it. But more and more, I see that. And I'm school-based too. I've worked in non-public programs, but I feel like school-based, my parents are retired teachers. So it's just part of who I am. And it's so different, to be a school-based BCBA, thinking about the ethical code. I'm teaching that class right now this semester. There's just so many things that come up. And a lot of principals may not even know what a BCBA is, but it's something they probably need to hire for their district. So that's a whole other thing, right? If somebody had a micro-credential and something like that, they'd be like, oh, okay, this person might feel comfortable coming in, being our first school-based BCBA, understanding how this all works within this type of setting. Just like you said, Jim, the IEP process, working with other people who are not behaviorally oriented. There's just a lot of barriers, right, to doing the job. So I can see in my mind, I'm like, oh, this makes a lot of sense to have that specific area. And I think if you were a BCBA coming into just this example of a school, there's so many things that we are not necessarily taught about public education, how schools work, all the things that you're going to, experience in that setting. So thanks for sharing that.
If I could piggyback on that a little bit, I recall, I remember the first time I heard of a BCBA being, well, actually, they weren't even a BCBA. BCBAs didn't exist then, but the first time a behavior analyst was hired in the school district was in the mid-90s. Mm. And I remember this person getting hired as a behavior analyst, and I think, wow, this is great. Our field is really starting to grow, especially when you consider how many school districts there are and so on. And then, but tying that into with the micro-credentials, maybe a person or director of special ed or whatever really needs somebody to deal with, say, self-injurious behavior. Mm-hmm. Or tantrum behavior or something. If there's a micro-credential in those particular areas, whether they're looking to hire somebody or contract with somebody, that would be a very, very nice thing for the person who's doing the hiring to have at hand to be able to help them make that decision.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I love that. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of pluses. I mean, I think I need a micro-credential now. My husband did say after I got my BCBA, he said, you're not going to go back to school again, are you? Because it was just, I had a 1-year-old and it was the BDS modules. It was every night I was just at my computer studying, right? It worked. Passed the first time. So for people that are wondering, how is a micro-credential different than a CEU course? What is I know that it sounds like it's a lot more information and you're demonstrating some type of competency, but you're both getting knowledge in the micro-credential and the CEU course. So what is the difference between those two things?
Yeah, the big difference is that with a micro-credential, it's generally understood that there's going to be a demonstration of skills. And with CEs, you don't have that. Sometimes you do, but generally you don't. If you go to a conference, all you got to do is have your rear end in the chair,
right,
and that's it. We've tried to set a higher standard here at BDS. All of our initial CE courses required active students responding,
right,
and we still have those available, but we also do webinars now. People really like webinars, so those are good, and we get high quality people in. But the thing about the micro credential is that there's a demonstration of skill. And Jim, if you have anything to add to that, go ahead.
No, that's certainly the prime thing that we think about, and probably one of the things that the field needs at this point, given that our only certification that we have is the entry-level certification. So, if we're going to grow and evolve as a field, and this has happened in other fields as well, they undergo the growth. Even the field of speech-language pathology went through this. Go through amazing growth as it's introduced, and then you start, fine-tuning the things like professional development that need to occur. So this is just kind of like the next step that behavior analysis would come to, and that is providing professional development with an attached skill verification component to it, so that we can actually verify that a skill set actually does exist. So Steve opened with this, which is one of the characteristics of a micro-credential, which comes under the category of assessment. The other characteristics that are typically talked about with micro-credentials, one is scope. Micro-credentials tend to focus on specific skills or competencies. Sometimes CEU courses cover a broader range or a broader topic, not always, but sometimes. Portability is something that is looked at as a plus for micro-credentials. Steve mentioned the blockchain technology, which is basically a technological solution to, having your information in a vault that isn't able to be changed. And again, I'm not an expert on that, but once you acquire that micro-credential, you can see that it exists, and employers can see that it exists, through a link, and that link would take you to all kinds of information about the micro-credential, what the person had to do for it, when it was obtained, lots of characteristics about it, and those would be, impermeable. They wouldn't be able to be changed or hacked or anything. And then stackability. So a lot of times these programs are able to put small micro-credentials in a group to form something larger. So you can combine a number of skill sets so that it comprises a big macro credential, as you will, or in the form of a bunch of micro credentials that are stacked together. There's lots of examples of those in the university settings. So as I said before in the intro, this is not something that's brand new. This is happening in many, many fields, both in the United States and outside of the United States.
Okay. And from like a time perspective, there's nothing that says I've been a speaker for some BDS webinars, about AAC, joint attention, things like that. Usually those are shorter in nature, correct? Like there's nothing that says a micro-credential, because you're talking about the stackability, how you can get different things, and all these different things might comprise something that's larger. There's nothing that says a micro-credential has to be 5 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours. This is kind of like the person or entity that's creating the micro-credential is coming up with the hours, the demonstration of skill. Is that correct to say, Jim?
That is correct to say. Okay. And it's a plus and it's a minus. And right. I'm going to segue into Steve talking about standards here in a minute, because there is no central agency or organization that controls the parameters for micro-credentials, not even the definition. So we would be following some fairly general consistencies within the field, within the area of micro-credentials when we're creating one. But even at BDS, we've gone back and forth on, okay, should this small skill set be a micro-credential, or should we make a larger skill set micro-credential?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Since there is no central organizing agency, you might want to try to collaborate with people. BDS has looked into helping to design a set of standards for micro-credentials. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, yeah. Let me give a little background information. We all of us BCBAs, we all earn our CEs, and many other professions too have CEs, and most of them, in most professions, it is a time-based assessment. You just have to be there be present.
Yeah.
And of course, as behavior analysts, that's like your fingernails on a chalkboard, because we don't measure behavior and we don't measure skills by how much time you spend on it. So, that's something that's always been, has bothered me. So, but to get to setting standards, it's like, we want to, we're in the process of setting up standards, at least for ourselves, where you have to actually demonstrate the skill. Now, there's different kinds of skills. Some skills are knowledge-based skills, and that could be a written product. But if the actual functional skill involves speaking, then the verification is going to involve speaking. If it actually involves, doing discrete trial training, we're going to have to actually see that discrete trial training, and we're going to have to see variations of it, and different kinds of learner responses, and make sure that the whole skill set is learned and not just a few rote responses.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that competency, I think, is very next level, like being able to like tell you how to do something, but then actually showing people, that is a whole other thing that you're demonstrating that you can do it. Because I'm just thinking of clients too. Like, I can tell you how to do one thing, they can say how to do it, but to actually demonstrate that skill, to generalize that skill, to show that you can do it, really shows that you have a certain knowledge base in that area, which I think makes a lot of sense. Okay,
our hope is that, unfortunately, anybody can give a digital badge or a micro-credential for anything. There's no regulatory body that says it has to be an actual demonstration of functional skills. But that's where we're setting the bar, and we're hoping that the whole field will, and that those who don't will be under peer pressure to change their ways.
Right. Well, and I think too, it goes back to just having a like, know, and trust factor when people think of organization A or organization B, knowing that you have for many, many years set a standard, that you have standards that you're setting, that you abide by all the rules. Like, I know when I'm doing like a presentation somewhere, because we're an ASH and ACE provider, I always have my financial disclosure slide. I always have my learning objectives. I always have how I'm going beyond the task list, which task list item I'm going through. So I think that consumers will look at company A and be like, it's hard. You can't just like offer a micro-credential. It sounds like there's a lot of steps to go through. It's not just something that you're like, oh, okay, yeah, next week, let's start offering a micro-credential. There's a lot of things that need to be done, so that you would think that if a company is going to do this, or an entity, it's not something that's entered into lightly. There's a lot of participant data and logistics that go behind offering a micro-credential, right? It seems like something you at BDS have been thinking about for a while.
Yes, we have. And you pointed out something that I'd like to say something about, and that is, I expect a lot of companies, like BDS will be doing these, but it could be any entity. It could be a university,
right,
or nonprofit, for-profit organization, whatever.
Yeah.
It could be a service provider organization.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Interesting. So I guess that leads to my next question, as far as, does BDS have a plan to offer a micro-credential in the future?
Jim.
We've had several plans. We've been doing this for a while, and lots of discussion. And I think what we've arrived at least a place to start. It came from a very good discussion among our leadership team in talking about what we think is needed, and just responding from, again, that school-based team kind of history that I have. I really like this idea that we are starting to move on, and that is we're currently developing a micro-credential toward developing and or documenting an earner's skill set. And we use the term earner for a micro-credential because you earn the credential. In the appropriate and effective use of experimental designs within applied contexts. Now, you might think everybody knows how to do experimental designs, but when you actually start working in the field with all the contextual limitations and all the problems that occur, sometimes it's difficult to put those into play because of time constraints or whatever. So we wanted to offer a micro-credential that focused on empirically managing those real-world or clinical issues and dilemmas in behavior analysis. So earners would acquire knowledge and expertise in using scientific methodology with behavior analytic service delivery. Again, building on what they know. Maybe there's some gaps in their education, maybe not, but we would at least be documenting all of that. And they would learn how to match specific experimental questions and context to optimal experimental designs. So using actual real-world examples, situations, and then matching what you know about experimental design to overcome whatever limitations or characteristics of the context that are present. So upon completion of this micro-credential, they would be better equipped to design and implement effective experiments in school systems, in clinical settings, enhancing their ability to address any of the practical challenges they might find in the field or out in the real world.
Okay.
And you'd be surprised sometimes, you get a job and you go into a situation and you're stressed with all of these things and it doesn't come to mind. Oh, I can do a multiple baseline there and show this, or,
right.
I can do a change in criterion design to show this. So it isn't really focused on research level types of applications of experimental design, but those types of things you would do to either convince the school team or parents or school districts that certain services should be put in place for children, or that other things should happen in an applied setting.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. And then being able to, I think too, like working in a school team, I always talk about when I teach the ethics class here at Kent State, using understandable language. I think it's so important for us to be in touch with the science and use scientific terms when we're in the right crowd. But Jim, when you're at a IEP table and maybe you used a certain research design, or maybe you read some type of research article, or you took this micro-credential, but the way that you would convey that would be really different at the public school IEP table, right?
Absolutely. I could see an entire micro-credential just on that. Yes. I could have used that. I'm telling you, Rose, I could have used that early in my career. It would have saved me a lot of stress.
Right. Yes. Because I think this is the thing when I first became duly certified and I started my business 7 years ago. For me, it's just very different. My consumer may not be a BCBA, it might be a speech therapist. It's both, but not everybody understands all the technical terms that we use. And we know that it's important to understand those and to use those in certain contexts. But sometimes when you're with people who are non-behavioral colleagues, you can really turn somebody off to the science, which we know is so powerful. I think it's how you convey the message, right?
It is how you convey the message. And it's broader things. It's how you're able to interact and collaborate with people. It's your even your knowledge of we've been using this public school example, even your knowledge of how that system works might be some content that you don't have that you might want to put into play and document that you have it that would be worthwhile, or in another setting, in a research setting, you might want to document that you know how to do certain types of work with certain types of subjects or use certain types of equipment. There's a potential for all different micro-credentials. So We just offered one that we're starting to work on, but it's one of thousands that could be put in place and probably should be put in place
Right.
if the field of behavior analysis is going to move to the next level, take the next step.
Yeah.
You know what? If I can talk about that for a minute, I remember when I think both my master's and my doctoral program, there was a lot of emphasis on, we talk behavior analysis, or as my wife likes to use the term, behavior ease, amongst each other. But, don't do that in, like you say, IEP meetings and so on, and with parents, you got to use lay language. And that was emphasized that we do that in, like I said, my master's and doctoral degree, but we never got actual training on that,
Right.
And once you could talk about how to, demonstrate a functional relationship using a multiple baseline design, you could get fluent in that, and you could write that in your papers and talk to your professors and answer questions about it and so on in an academic setting. But then, bam, all of a sudden you're in front of a parent. It's like, oh, how do I explain this? And so you do it the way you learned, and then you come across as a obnoxious jerk, or
right,
or you figure it out, and so that's the type of skill I think that is quite conducive for micro-credential training. It's advanced,
right,
and it is it's something that's needed. It's something that's certainly acknowledged in your graduate program, but it's something that they just don't get around to teaching.
Yeah, I love that idea. In some of my talks about collaboration and ethics and tying that all in, I just have examples. I've been using the Broadhead article, which is almost 10 years old now, but about how to collaborate with non-behavioral colleagues. And so now I've just been doing specific case scenarios and then just having language that the speech therapist might say, and the BCBA, instead of saying, where's your research for that? They might say, oh, I haven't heard of that intervention. Tell me about it. And it sounds silly, and it sounds like something that any professional would say, but some of those soft skills on, we know we have this whole knowledge base in this particular area, and what people may see, they may not understand all the things that we're thinking about when we're, providing this service in the school or, in a different setting. But I think it's important to understand all of that and then to be able to convey it in a way that is user-friendly. Well, that's interesting. That's great that your PhD and master's program focused on that, because I think some people haven't learned that. So interesting. Well, it sounds really interesting. One more question. I just have a question too, kind of from a provider standpoint. So do you think for the micro-credential that when people, or when you offer it, and if you don't have the answer, that's okay, but do you think it would be a lot of self-paced courses, or do you think there would be a live component? Obviously, the skill set, showing the competency would be some type of interactive component, but the actual knowledge gaining, have you thought about whether some parts will be self-paced and some parts will be live, or is that still kind of in the process?
Dream or the reality?
All your thoughts. Tell me all your thoughts.
Well, we've had lots of discussions about this, and here's the thing: when you create an asynchronous course, it's very scalable. You can teach it to 2 people or 2 million people. It doesn't matter. When you have to have an actual eyes-on evaluation of a product, all of a sudden the cost of that just skyrockets. So we're trying to figure out how to do this efficiently. Right. But I think, at least starting out, it is going to be an eyes-on individual evaluation, which unfortunately is going to make it kind of expensive. Right. So, but we're looking at ways that maybe we could bring that down, that cost down, and but I think certainly the most valid and trustworthy way is through somebody who's very qualified to follow a protocol and do the evaluation. But the teaching up to that point, we're thinking is going to be asynchronous.
Yeah.
So it's more like, okay, you're going to go through this set of learning exercises, and at the end you got to demonstrate the skill, and that's
Right.
going to be the manual part of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that. I think that I know that when I'm taking a lot of CE courses or just business courses because I'm a small business owner, but if I take a course and I've paid the money and I have skin in the game, as they say in the online space, I'm excited to learn it. You know, if I take a course about YouTube or Instagram or whatever it is in my world about dissemination, I'm like, I signed up for this, I paid for it. I'm really excited because I know this knowledge is going to help me learn whatever I want to learn. So I think that people will be excited about that. And it's not like you just want to get it done. You actually really want to learn it to build your competency, to make your career better or your current work setting better, and to feel more knowledgeable that you're helping and serving others. So I think this
there
sounds
is a small component, Rose, about teaching people, but there's also the piece about documenting what you've already gained in skill set. Because I could have been working in an area for years, but I have nothing to show for it.
Right.
So in a micro-credential, there would be a way to, you wouldn't have to go through all the training again necessarily. You would just have to verify that you have the skill set in order to get the micro-credential.
Oh, yeah. So, that's a thought too.
And there's a lot of inadequacies about how with hiring people through an interview process, because that's just one channel, it's like them talking to you. You might, of course, review their Vita and so on, but you're not actually watching them demonstrate a skill. So, this is one advantage to micro-credentials, is that you get to see that actual demonstration, and that could be a big part of your hiring decision.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I have a million things that I'm thinking about. I think I need to start a micro-credential. There's so many areas that are specific, right? That I know people are like, I wish I knew more about this or that. And the one that you're going to create or, in the future have been talking about, I think sounds really amazing and sounds like something that people will want to take to, increase their skill set and to help and support others. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to connect with both of you again.
Thanks, Rose.
Thank you, Rose.
For more information about BCBA exam prep and curriculum supplement, RBT training, CE courses, including live webinars and more, please visit bds.com. We know that learning is a lifestyle, not a destination, and we thank you for including us in your journey by listening to this episode of the BDS podcast.